past the hour. I start every class at 11 minutes past the hour, so I always open the Zoom at the top of the hour, and I usually have something educational or uplifting playing during those 11 minutes while people get situated, get their coffee, or a snack, or get prayed up and buckled in. So for today, I'm going to have a video playing a crash course in Black Panther Party history. It's about 13 minutes long. I'll cut it just a little bit short, and we'll start class at 11:11 Pacific. Welcome into the space.
For a long time in order to have a huge impact on the history of this country. An example of that is the Black Panther Party. Founded in 1966 by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, the Black Panther Party reached its peak just 4 years later in 1970. The organization had an impact on U.S. history and culture that far exceeded its relatively short lifespan and small membership. Let's take a look to understand why. Let's start with the Black Panther Party's origin story in the thought bubble. Originally known as the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, the organization started through the campus organizing of Seale and Newton. They met in Oakland, California in 1961, while they were both students at Merritt College. In the tense atmosphere following the 1965 assassination of Malcolm X, Newton, Seale, and other student activists organized the Black History Fact Group. The group was founded in part as a response to the university failing to acknowledge the role of African Americans in settling the American West in the 1800s. Among their goals was to urge the school to offer courses in Black history and to establish a Black Studies department. Newton and Seale also joined the college's sole Students Advisory Council, whose stated goal was to, quote, develop Black student leadership, advocate for a more inclusive curriculum, and to connect the university to the community. But disputes within the group would lead Newton and Seale to eventually resign. But their struggle to continue the work of Black radical political organizing didn't end there. Newton and Seale pivoted their goals. Rather than looking to join another political organization, they decided to form their own. Students of the teachings of Malcolm X, they founded the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, later known just as the Black Panther Party, in 1966, following the murder of unarmed teenager Matthew Johnson at the hands of San Francisco police. Thanks, Thought Bubble.
Look, you're not actually going to get anything done by watching another YouTube video. In fact, you're literally only procrastinating more. What you need is...
According to historian Robin C. Spencer, Newton and Seale framed the tenets of their new organization around the belief that Black Americans were living in an internal colony within the larger mother country of the United States. Borrowing from Black nationalists and post-colonial movements of the time, they posited that the relationship between the Black colony and the mother country was, according to Spencer, one of pure exploitation of labor and resources. Therefore, they sought to liberate the Black colony through self-determination as a part of their larger goal to transform America and eventually the rest of the world. This aligned with their larger vision of correcting racial and class inequalities. Seale and Newton were also interested in how Black liberation struggles worldwide were interconnected to the struggles of Black Americans. They were avid readers of Marxist theory and studied anti-colonial movements from around the world. They believed that guerrilla warfare could be an effective strategy for social change, and that small groups of armed people could lead that change. Their politics were also informed by the struggles for self-determination around the world in places like Vietnam, Zimbabwe, then known as Rhodesia, South Africa, and Mozambique. After the Black Panthers were founded, Newton and Seale outlined the group's agenda, philosophical views, and political objectives in their 10-point program. The program's objectives state: 1. We want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our Black and oppressed communities. 2. We want full employment for our people. 3. We want an end to the robbery by the capitalists of our Black and oppressed communities. 4. We want decent housing, fit for the shelter of human beings. 5. We want decent education for our people that exposes the true nature of this decadent American society. We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in the present-day society. 6. We want completely free healthcare for all Black and oppressed people. 7. We want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of black people, other people of color, and all oppressed people inside the United States. 8. We want an immediate end to all wars of aggression. 9. We want freedom for all black and oppressed people now held in U.S. federal, state, county, city, military prisons, and jails. We want trials by a jury of peers for all persons charged with so-called crimes under the laws of this country. And 10. We want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, peace, and people's community control of modern technology. After creating this 10-point platform, they decided on a name, borrowing from the Lowndes County Freedom Organization in Lowndes County, Alabama, a political group that used the image of the Black Panther in their materials and was led by activists including Stokely Carmichael and John Hewlett. In addition to their 10-point program, the Black Panthers were also actively engaged in their community through a number of social programs that look to pool collective resources and support the Black community. This group of programs served as a rallying cry and human rights manifesto, aiming to correct centuries of harm inflicted on all oppressed people. The Black Panthers' vision was at once practical, demanding things like health care and housing, while simultaneously being revolutionary in its scope. Among their most popular programs were the establishment of free health clinics in 13 Black communities across the country, and the implementation of free breakfast programs for school children in different parts of the U.S. The free breakfast program that was started by the Black Panthers became an inspiration for the breakfast programs that still exist in schools across the country today. The Black Panthers were also known for carrying unconcealed, loaded weapons and monitoring the activities of local police in Black neighborhoods. As they continued to engage in political activism and social change, their popularity grew across the country, especially in urban centers with large minority communities like Los Angeles, New York City, and Philadelphia. Additional chapters were established in places like Chicago, Indianapolis, Detroit, Des Moines, Iowa, Paterson, New Jersey, and Wichita, Kansas. By 1968, approximately 2 years after the Panthers were founded, they had roughly 2,000 members across the country. But the burgeoning political movement that sought to guarantee the rights and freedoms of Black people also attracted a fair amount of controversy, especially as it relates to their interactions with the U.S. government and the police. For example, in October of 1967, Newton allegedly killed Oakland police officer John Fry. This followed a period of armed interaction with police officers, since one of the principal tenets of the Black Panthers was the right to self-defense in the face of white supremacist violence. In May of 1967, Newton had sent more than 24 armed Panthers to the California state capitol in Sacramento to protest the passing of a law that would take away their right to openly bear arms. Ronald Reagan was governor of California at the time and vehemently opposed the Panthers, who he believed served as a threat to his law and order campaign. The resulting news coverage painted the Panthers as a militant group and the new leaders of the Black Power movement more broadly. By the morning of October 28, 1967, Newton estimated that the Oakland police had pulled him over more than 50 times since 1966. That morning, he was pulled over by police, and within minutes, Newton was on the ground with a bullet in his stomach. Officer John Fry was fatally wounded, and another officer was injured. Newton was named as the shooter and handcuffed while still in the hospital. During this period in 1967, while Newton awaited trial and Seal was serving a 6-month sentence as a result of the Black Panthers' protest in Sacramento, a member named Eldridge Cleaver, who had joined the group in 1966, took over as the new leader of the Panthers. In 1967, he married fellow Black Panther member Kathleen Neal. Cleaver's critically acclaimed 1968 memoir, Soul on Ice, which told the story of his life and time in prison, sold over 1 million copies within 2 years. Cleaver had studied the work of writers like Thomas Paine, Voltaire, Karl Marx, Richard Wright, all while incarcerated, and this influenced his personal philosophies and political writings. However, there was criticism of Soul on Ice for its depictions of violence and women. Specifically, Cleaver admits in the text to committing serial rape of women, beginning with Black women in poor communities for practice before beginning the serial rape of white women. Cleaver's admissions in Soul on Ice point to larger societal and systemic issues of patriarchy and sexism, namely the pervasive disregard of violence toward women. And these issues, which were present within the Black Panther Party, would serve as an ongoing challenge for the organization as a whole. Additionally, troubles with law enforcement continued to plague the Black Panthers. First, Newton was convicted of voluntary manslaughter in 1968 and sentenced to 2 to 15 years in prison. However, on May 29, 1970, the California Court of Appeals overturned the conviction, and the next few trials ended with deadlocked juries. The Black Panthers he returned to, even after just a few years, had shifted dramatically in some ways from the organization that he founded with SEAL. For example, there was now a growing group of white radicals who had joined the group's ranks, and under the leadership of Cleaver and others, the rhetoric of self-defense had shifted to include an ideology that embraced revolutionary violence. Additionally, the group faced inner turmoil. In 1969, Alex Rackley was murdered by other members of the Black Panthers who suspected that he was an informant. SEAL and other Panthers faced charges in New Haven, Connecticut for that alleged murder. But it wasn't only internal issues plaguing the organization. External forces also impacted the group, like the assassination of Black Panther Party members Fred Hampton and Mark Clark by the FBI and local police in Chicago in 1969. See, by 1969, the FBI, under its first director, J. Edgar Hoover, had declared the Panthers a communist organization and an enemy of the U.S. government. In 1968, Hoover called the Panthers, quote, one of the greatest threats to the nation's internal security. Because of this, the Panthers became the target of the FBI's COINTELPRO, a secret counterintelligence program that used to surveil politically progressive groups. But the organization continued to function, with Elaine Brown serving as the chairwoman of the Black Panther Party from 1974 to 1977. She was the only woman to hold this role and often faced sexism and discrimination for asserting herself and leading the party. Gender roles within the party were often quite restrictive, but women like Brown, Kathleen Cleaver, Assata Shakur, and Erica Huggins held leadership positions within the organization, including as editors of the party's newspaper. Still, COINTELPRO agents managed to infiltrate events and the personal lives of prominent members of the party. In the 1970s, a Senate committee led by Frank Church, a Democrat from Idaho, exposed the FBI and COINTELPRO. As the scholar Peniel E. Joseph has described it, the FBI and COINTELPRO had a, quote, clandestine role in the dismantling of the Black Power, New Left, and anti-war movements, and revealed further evidence of the pitfalls of unchecked government power.
Assalamu alaikum, peace and power. We're going to stop the video there for now. Our good brother Fernando De Veras has put the link to the video in the chat. Welcome into Panther Power. We are going to head back to that video provided by Crash Course in just a moment. But first, let me set the intention for the space and welcome folks into the space. For those of you who have been members of what's now the Revolutionary Learning Community, the 501c3 nonprofit educational that I run, or who took online courses with the previous iteration of that, Inca to Scholars, you guys will be familiar with this particular modality of education from me. Many of you will not. This is your first time checking into this online space, but I like to set the intentions in the space and welcome folks in. The first thing is that if you are in a position to turn your camera on to create a virtual classroom environment and to create mutual accountability inside the space and to help grow the trust inside the space, then please by all means do so. These classes started as an attempt to replicate what I've been doing in public teaching gatherings for a couple of decades, and that's just always easier to do when we can see one another, when the cipher is an unbroken circle. Having said that, I understand that people got kids to watch, mouths to feed, dishes to do, and other things that they need to accomplish during this time, and online courses allow more flexibility for that than other kinds of gatherings. So if you are not in a position to put your camera on, totally fine and understandable. Please utilize the chat space in order to provide encouraging commentary, to ask questions, to provide resources, as our brother Fernando just did, quick grabbing that YouTube link, because we're going to try to utilize the chat also as part of the community building effort. And I'll have all of these recordings up on the campaign website, and we'll also try to upload the chat texts to the campaign website as well. One more piece on this is that we did decide to organize this as a campaign event rather than as an event with the nonprofit. So the recordings will be available on butchwearforgov.com, and we'll continue portions of the discussion there. Your homework assignment after class will also be on butchwearforgov.com. The campaign has what's the word, counseled me that I need to lean into my mode as an educator as part of the overall political strategy. So we do in class today as part of the campaign. Um, so that's the first thing. And then and also just to understand that we are in a space of like mutual trust, love, accountability, and we are seeking solutions to try to get us out of 5 centuries of white supremacy, capitalism, and imperialism. So move in the space in a spirit of generosity. And we already know from the way that that introductory video ended that COINTELPRO is already in the space. They're for sure operatives on the Zoom. And so, take regular safety precautions in your communications and interactions. We have a completely secure communications platform, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. So before I actually get into the content directly, and I will start pulling up the slides for the content, I want to say just one word to kind of speak to the moment that we're in. The Black Panther Party emerged in an environment of incredible political turmoil, political violence, and massive state repression of all kinds of anti-capitalist, leftist, anti-war, anti-imperialist, anti-racist organizing. It was founded as a response to unprecedented escalations in the exploitative, extractive, and violent nature of American empire. And yet, where we sit in 2025 makes the repression of the 60s look like child's play. Understand that the moment that we currently occupy will require us to not only draw lessons from the Panthers of what they were able to do successfully, but also to take lessons from what they were unable to do, lessons on how to limit the negative effects of infiltration, how to struggle against misogyny and homophobia and other kinds of negative tendencies inside our midst. The lessons that we're trying to draw are primarily positive. Obviously, between 1966 and 1982, the Black Panther Party changed the course of not just American history, but of world history. And yet, the moment that we are currently in is unprecedented in our history. So we are going to need to mine this history for resources on how to approach our contemporary moment. But we are also going to need to have the audacity to innovate on the basis of our received traditions in order to rise to what this moment is calling for from us. So understand that this is a dangerous moment, fraught with potential that we must realize, lest the next generation find themselves without even the meager means of recourse and resistance and struggle that we now have. We are fighting for future generations to even have the capacity to fight. And with those opening words, I'll turn to the subject matter of the class, properly speaking. I'll go to the slides and let's start this as a slideshow. Let me know, here we go. Does that show up as full screen for you guys? And everybody's able to see okay? Just give me a thumbs up. Okay, that's what's up. Um, so Panther Power, Principles and Practices of Revolutionary Politics. As an academic and as a scholar, I like to start with definitions. So Panther Power, we are talking about the modalities of acquiring and struggling for power that the Black Panther Party, this historically extant institution, operationalized during its years of existence between 1966 and 1982. We are going to dig deeply into the nature of the Black Panther Party. And we're going to try, as I mentioned a moment ago, to mine the Panthers' legacy in order to provide meaningful remedies for our contemporary moment of repression and violence. We're going to be focused on the principles and the practice. And just so that you understand the mental architecture of this course, today, Saturday, we're going to be focused predominantly on principles. Tomorrow, we're going to be focused predominantly on practice so that the course is divided in that way. Because we have to kind of understand the theory and where Black Panther organizational tactics and strategies come from in order to understand the practice. And when we watch the practice unfold, we will be taking lessons both from the manifest successes and also from the challenges that the Panthers were unable to overcome. So we're going to be focused predominantly on the principles in today's session and predominantly on the practices in tomorrow's session. That means that we're going to be talking about the backdrop, the intellectual backdrop to the rise of the Panthers, and also especially the foundation of the Panthers with Bobby Seale and Huey Newton in Oakland, the Black Panther Party 10-point platform, and so forth today. Tomorrow, we are going to be moving more towards the most successful iterations of Panther political models. So we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about the Chicago chapter and Fred Hampton. So I want you to just start to think about the course in that way. Today, more principles, more Oakland focused. Tomorrow, more practice, more Chicago and globally focused. We're going to be talking about revolutionary politics. And here, for our definition of revolution, we are going to lean on Huey. I said we're headed to Oakland for most of the day today. Um, So we'll take this from Huey P. Newton's Revolutionary Suicide. And let me just also point out, for those of you that have not yet joined the Revolutionary Book Club, if somebody can put the Revolutionary Book Club into the chat, we read Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. Can anybody remind me when that was? Was that February or March? Yes, and we will be doing a reboot for the Revolutionary Book Club. I had some health issues with my son that I wasn't able to attend for a month. But we've read Revolutionary Suicide in the Revolutionary Book Club. If somebody can put a link to that and also the Revolutionary community in the chat, that would be helpful. You can go back and watch the videos of previous Revolutionary Book Club meetings. So you can see our discussion of Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. You can see our discussion of Assata, the autobiography of Assata Shakur, the autobiography of Malcolm X, and the other things that we've discussed to this point. I think Franz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth was one of the other texts that we read. So back to Fred. And yeah, I'm in touch with Fred Hampton Jr. Regularly. He wasn't available for today. We're going to see if he's possibly available for tomorrow. And he's done an online fundraiser with us not too long ago, in point of fact. So, Huey, revolution is not an action, it is a process. Times change and policies of the past are not necessarily effective in the present. Our military strategies were not frozen. As conditions changed, so did our tactics. Patrolling the community was only one step in our 10-point program. As a matter of fact, the right to bear arms for protection appeared near the end of our program as point 7 and came only after those demands we considered far more urgent: freedom, employment, education, and housing. Now, just in a few lines, Huey has said a great deal. I want to refocus us on the top because this is what was in the back of my head when I talked about the need to innovate in this moment on the basis of past precedent. Revolution is not an action, it is a process. It is a process, it is a process, it is a process. It is ongoing, and revolution evolves in the forms that it must take in a dialectic relationship with the circumstances in which one is embedded. Times change, and the policies of the past are not necessarily effective in the present. And this is important because we need to make sure that we are taking an analytical approach to studying the past, not thinking that we can just copy and paste, but that we can understand the principles that are undergirding Panther practice and how to apply those with maximum effect under our contemporary circumstances. He then goes on, and this is crucial, to debunk one of the kind of principal misrepresentations and an intentional misrepresentation of the Panther legacy. And this is going to be an important focus for us both today and tomorrow, is that everybody was obsessed with the image of armed black men following police. And don't get me wrong, I like that image a great deal myself. We're going to talk about how ICE Watch and Police Watch in our contemporary moment are absolutely crucial components of the direct action that we need to be undertaking, and how to do that in a secure fashion so that we're not being infiltrated and utilized for nefarious purposes. But as Huey pointed out, that is not the essence of the affair. The essence of the affair was in those programs that were originally called community programs and eventually became called survival programs, survival pending revolution. And these are the things that the Panther Party developed in order to meet the most immediate basic needs of oppressed and marginalized communities. This is what we now today understand as mutual aid. I'm going to go back one slide and then I'll finish the politics definition. This is my own kind of roadmap for the course, and I'll tell you, and then I'll finish the definitional terms because we only have one term left. We've done Panther Power, we've done politics, or sorry, we've done revolution, we've done principles and practice, we have not done politics. The Black Panther Party developed a holistic approach to revolutionary organizing, mutual aid, direct action, and even electoral politics. They built a robust anti-capitalist structure that transcended racial bounds, shaping working class movements nationwide and around the globe. For this reason, they were the most feared political unit in the United States of America. All of that heat that came from the feds came because no organization in the recent history of the United States posed more of a direct challenge to white supremacy, capitalism, or imperialism, to the basic extractive and exploitative nature of the American state than the Panthers did. That made Panthers public enemy number one. And when you realize that the Panthers were the thing that the man most feared, then you know that you need to come get these lessons. You know that you need to come get these lessons. So in this seminar, we're going to try to explore the roots and branches of that Panther practice and how to honor and expand that legacy in this current moment. The last of the terms that I didn't yet define from the title, Panther Power, Principles and Practice of Revolutionary Politics. Huey gave us our definition of revolution. The Panthers were fond of quoting Mao Zedong for the definition of politics. Since I'm a professor, we'll make this interactive. Somebody raise your hand and give us Mao's definition of politics. We're going to see what kind of room we're in right now. Come on, y'all, don't be shy. Or type it in the chat if you're afraid to use the raise hand button. What did Mao say about politics? Barrel of a gun. Fernando. See, we know Fernando's going to come through. This is one of our good brothers in Santa Ana. Let me just unmute you. Go ahead.
All right, if I'm not mistaken, the definition is politics is war without bloodshed. War is politics with bloodshed.
Come on, man. Pull up, my brother. That's exactly the definition. And so let's repeat that again. Politics is war without bloodshed. Politics is war without bloodshed. So understand that this is a state of war, that this is the exercise of warfare um, in our contemporary moment. And the Panthers were constantly quoting Mao on that particular point. So now we are in the thick of this. Let me move ahead. I want to say one piece about this. We've talked a little bit about mutual aid. We've talked a little bit about direct action, but the Panthers were actually also interested in utilizing electoral politics as part of their overall revolutionary strategy. And this is another piece that is not usually understood. We're going to come back to this in a little bit greater detail in just a moment. So, first, the intellectual backdrop to the rise of the Panthers. The Panthers emerge from meetings between Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton as they're working through student organizations and various bourgeois organizations that they find not meeting the contemporary moment. And Huey talks eloquently about this in Revolutionary Suicide, that especially they're not speaking to the brother or sister on the corner. They're not speaking to what Marxists will refer to as the lumpen proletariat, not the proletariat, not the working class, the lumpen proletariat, the people that are not even working, the hustlers, the sex workers, the dope dealers, the brothers and sisters on the corner, and that Huey saw a profound potential in that lumpen proletariat because these were people that were already opting out of the system. They had no stake in it. And if that group could be radicalized and politicized, then this was going to be something that would create an incredible amount of pressure on the system. And this is one of the first lessons that we can draw from the Panthers' form of organization is that with the possible exception of the Nation of Islam, which was in some ways more politically conservative, or in a lot of ways more politically conservative organization, no other contemporary organizations were as successful in reaching the people that were best understood as the refuse of society, not even allowed to take part in it. And our engagement and our institution building needs to have the capacity to reach those folks. So when Bobby Seale and Huey Newton were engaged in this kind of critique of the bourgeois institutions that they had been engaging, they started to kind of articulate a new kind of radical vision. Now, where did this radical vision come from? Huey talks about it being deeply shaped by reading Mao. So you're going to need to understand the Marxist roots of this. He talks about, and I'll go to the slide for this, that Bobby Seale had collected, and here's Bobby. Let's see. Oh, it says screen sharing is paused. Let me try that again. Here we go. And I gotta find the slide. 1 second. You would think after 5 years of online teaching, I would be better at this. Here we go. You able to see that? Perfect. Bobby Seale had collected all of Malcolm X's speeches and ideas from papers like The Militant and Muhammad Speaks. These we studied carefully. Although Malcolm's program for the Organization of Afro-American Unity was never put into operation, he has made it clear that the Blacks ought to arm. Malcolm's influence was ever present. We continue to believe that the Black Panther Party exists in the spirit of Malcolm. Often, it is, Huey writes in Revolutionary Suicide, it is difficult to say exactly how an action or program has been determined or influenced in a spiritual way. Such intangibles are hard to describe, although they can be more significant than any precise influence. Therefore, the words on this page cannot convey the effect that Malcolm has had on the Black Panther Party. Although, as far as I am concerned, the party is a living testament to his life work. I do not claim that the party has done what Malcolm would have done. Many others say that their programs are Malcolm's programs. We do not say this, but Malcolm's spirit is in us. And this is an important piece to understand that Malcolm's shadow is ever present over the rise of the Panthers. It is shaping the approach to armed self-defense that the Panthers adopt, and that becomes their signature. It becomes the way that they are able to engage and appeal to that lumpen proletariat, because a lot of brothers are ready to get strapped and ride around following cops in that moment. And that is a direct response to Malcolm. And Huey, who is not religious, nonetheless talks about this as a spiritual impact that Malcolm has on the Panther movement. So in their writings, they talk a great deal about the spiritual and intellectual impact of Malcolm, the personal and moral impact of Malcolm. That's why I came in today rocking the five pillars sweater, right? Because Malcolm is over this affair and influencing it and shaping it in a bunch of different ways. But as was already pointed out, there is also an international dimension to the inspiration that's guiding the Panthers. The Panthers are reading Mao. The Panthers are reading Frantz Fanon, and who I mentioned that we discussed in the Revolutionary Book Club. They are developing a third world international socialist approach to the specific circumstances of Black oppression. They are understanding this as an international phenomenon and not treating it solely as a domestic phenomenon. In order to get into the principles of the Black Panther Party, what we're going to do for the next 30 minutes or so is we're literally just going to go through that 10-point program. Let me take you back to that 10-point program, and we will provide a little bit of analysis and commentary on our way through. And this should go from the 403 mark.
1. We want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our Black and oppressed communities. 2.
We want freedom. We want the power to determine the course of our Black and oppressed communities. What is being alluded to here in Panther Platform Point 1? It is the principle of self-determination that is driving anti-colonial resistance movements across the globe from the 1930s through the time of the rise of the Panthers in the 1960s. And unless and until you understand the Panthers as an iteration of that broader anti-colonial struggle, your vision of why the Panthers were so effective is going to be incomplete. Because the first of their statements is articulating a principle of anti-colonial self-determination. We demand the right for freedom and self-determination of the direction of our own communities. This was shaped by a broader history of Pan-Africanist struggle. And one of the things that made the Panthers so dangerous was not just their ability to cross racial lines inside the United States of America, but it was their ability to cross national lines and connect the dots of the internal freedom struggles of Black people in the United States of America with the broader struggles of the Chinese Revolution, with the broader struggle of African independence movements, with the broader struggle of the Algerian liberation movement. That's why Fanon is so crucial. Fanon, for those that don't know his background, is from Martinique, a Black scholar trained in psychology who doesn't just write Black Skins, White Masks, and Wretched of the Earth, but eventually becomes an integral part of the Algerian National Liberation Front. So he is writing about armed resistance while participating in armed resistance against colonial rule in the 1950s and into the 1960s. So this international third world self-determination and liberation perspective is deeply shaping the way that the Panthers move. And for those that are unaware, this is one of the oldest and most deeply rooted elements of the Black liberation tradition in the United States of America, going all the way back to 1829 and David Walker's appeal to the colored citizens of the world. That when Black liberation movements are at the most dangerous. It is when they are connected to broader international freedom struggles for self-determination. And we are seeing this in our contemporary moment. This is being awakened in a lot of you. A lot of you guys are in this room right now because Palestine radicalized you, correct? And we're going to come back to this in a moment when we talk about imperial wars, because this is another key piece of the Panther platform. So, keeping this dialectic relationship between the inner struggle, the interior struggle here in the belly of the beast, and the broader anti-imperialist struggle, this is right at the top of the Panther platform because these two things are interconnected. They cannot be separated, the one from the other, in the interest of time. Oh, and just so you know, I'm going to do an initial presentation. We're going to stop and take questions. Then you're going to get your homework assignment, and we're going to talk about what's coming tomorrow. So start writing down your questions, and I'm only going to be able to go into so much detail with the initial presentation, but you guys have plenty of time to ask questions about these pieces. Let me get back to the slide. Let's go to point 2 on our principles.
Two, we want full employment for our people.
We're
Three,
doing 3 together.
we want an end to the robbery by the capitalists of our Black and oppressed communities.
Full employment and an end to the robbery by the capitalists of our Black and oppressed communities. So first, full employment. One of the things that happens specifically with the Panthers, and you will see this in a number of places as the 10-point platform unfolds, is that the Panthers are listening to the people on the street and letting folks on the street influence the nature and the shape of the demands. These are practical demands. We want employment, jobs, dignity, an opportunity to earn an income. But this is immediately connected to a critique of the broader system in which labor is embedded and exploited. And this is specifically, and this part cannot be stressed enough, this is specifically a Marxist critique. The Marxist-Leninist orientation of the Panthers is indispensable to understanding what makes the Panthers so dangerous. It is a deeply anti-capitalist movement that is fighting against this system of oppression, which is literally founded through the Atlantic slave trade on Black bodies. That's the origins of the rise of capitalism. And the next time there's a non-racist capitalism will be the first time that there's ever been a non-racist capitalism. Okay. So understanding the interconnectedness of struggle against white supremacy and the struggle against capitalism is absolutely crucial to understanding the success of the Panthers. And this is a part where, as a historian, it's my duty to guide you guys to the fact that there's actually a long history of Black Marxist, communist, and socialist organizing all through the 20th century. The Panthers are not inventing this out of whole cloth. If you take a look, if somebody can find the book and put it into the chat, it's just hitting me, on the top of the head. But Robin Kelly writes an amazing book called Hammer and Hoe, Black communists and about Black communists in Alabama in the 1920s and 1930s. People do not understand the extent to which anti-capitalist socialist critiques are part of the Black organizing tradition throughout the 20th century. And the most radical iterations of leftist thought have emerged consistently inside Black communities. I made a post about this just the other day, where I said that people don't understand how deeply Marxist critique is actually embedded just in Black culture more broadly. We are the only ethnicity that uses the word bourgeois in casual conversation. Why y'all acting so damn bougie? Many of y'all never even made the connection and realized that the reason why this exists at all is because of the ubiquity of anti-capitalist critique throughout the history of Black resistance movements, especially in the 20th century. And this goes back through figures like many of the most prominent, important, significant Black freedom thinkers: W.E.B. Du Bois, Marxist; Paul Robeson, Marxist. And these are people that are ostracized in their lifetime, and then they are excised from our historical memory because of the danger that Marxist analysis presents to capitalist organization. So it's crucial to understand that this is not something that is exotic or exogenous to Black communities. This is part of a Black community's conversation about how to organize against capitalism that runs the length of the 20th century. Now, don't get me wrong, not all of Black anti-capitalist thinking is derived from Marx. If you read my first book, The Walking Quran, there are Black Muslim anti-capitalists and anti-imperialists 2 centuries before Karl Marx is born. But it's just that any effort to have a conversation about what makes the Panthers effective that is not comprehensive of their Marxism Leninism is a lie. Their socialist approach is part of what makes them effective, and it's part of what makes them so dangerous because they understand class struggle and are constantly rooting people back to and trying to root out bourgeois categories and influences in the revolutionary culture that they are trying to shape. Let me go to a slide to help with this. One moment. Here we go. So another one of the great Panthers. Are you guys seeing that? Assata Shakur, whose autobiography we read in the Revolutionary Book Club not too long ago. Now, Assata Shakur eventually leaves the Panthers, and this is important to understand because she's remembered as a Panther. She was a Panther, but the misogyny and some of the organizational dysfunction that gets introduced by COINTELPRO is part of the reason why Assata ends up leaving that organization and affiliating herself with Black Liberation Army instead. And so we'll come back to that tomorrow. But understand, Asada gives us some of the best ways of thinking about how we think about socialism, Marxism, and it helps tie a couple pieces of our conversation so far together. So she writes in her autobiography, someone asked me what communism was, and I opened my mouth to answer. Then I realized I didn't have the faintest idea. My image of a communist came from a cartoon. It was a spy with a black trench coat and a black hat pulled down over his face, slinking around corners. She's talking about having a conversation with some of the Africans in the greater New York City area at that time in her life. These are Africans who have been connected to those anti-colonial independence struggles. These are African socialists. And so therefore, when she gives this anti-communist spiel, they literally laugh at her. And she said that she never forgot that day. That she continues, we're taught at such an early age to be against the communists, yet most of us don't have the faintest idea what communism is. Only a fool lets somebody else tell him who his enemy is. It's got to be one of the most basic principles of living. Always decide, always decide who your enemies are for yourself, and never let your enemies choose your enemies for you. Right. I see Paul smiling. That's a whole bar, right? Never let your enemies choose your enemies for you. Only a fool lets somebody tell him who his enemy is. A fact that a lot of people don't know about me is that on the south side of Minneapolis, at South High, they had the only Russian language program in high school in the state of Minnesota. I took Russian. in high school as a freshman. And the reason I took Russian was because the propaganda of the Cold War period was telling us that communism was bad and the Russians were the bad guys. And I never trusted a thing that the man ever said. So I said, I'm going to learn Russian because I would like to be able to read what these people say, because never let your enemies choose your enemies for you. And Malcolm said something almost identical to this. He said, only a fool lets his enemy educate his children. We're going to come back to this in a moment when we get to the Panthers' approach to education. But this is absolutely crucial. We have a massive amount of work of debunking the programming that people have about socialism. Now, socialist revolutions of the kind that the Panthers were seeking to instigate do not happen because everyone suddenly becomes socialist. That's not what we're looking for. We're not trying to persuade everyone to become a socialist. Socialist revolutions work because socialists provide, in most instances, the best material responses to the political oppression of capitalism. They provide the best answers. That's what the Panthers' survival programs were, but they came from a place of critique that was rooted inside this broader anti-capitalist Marxist discourse. But this is a crucial part. It was not limited to that broader class-based anti-capitalist Marxist discourse. That gives me my next slide, if I can find it. Here we go. Nope, wrong one. Yeah. Back to Huey. Everybody seeing that okay? Huey says, I also saw the link between racism and the economics of capitalism. Although, despite the link, I recognized that it was necessary to separate the concepts in analyzing the general situation. In psychological terms, racism could continue to exist even after the economic problems that had created racism had been resolved. Never convinced that destroying capitalism would automatically destroy racism, I felt, however, that we could not destroy racism without wiping out its economic foundation. It was necessary to think much more creatively and independently about these complex interconnections. I'm going to stop here and ask y'all what y'all heard in Huey's analysis in this moment, just to break up the monotony of me speaking. I was raised in an African American rhetorical tradition that's built on call and response, and I've been talking for almost an hour. So let's bring y'all into the conversation. What did you hear Huey saying? I can put it back on screen, just so that you can have a look at the quote. Here we go. And just raise your hand and hop into the chat. Come on, y'all. Don't be shy. Yeah, Michelle.
Oops. So the reality is, if we don't plan for racism, sexism, all the other isms, racism especially, we'll never get rid of it. It'll still exist and can be replicated in systems going forward. And it's the same way with all of the structures of oppression. And that's kind of what this brings up for me, is just that reality that there's intentional actions that have to happen to be able to rid society of those oppressive forces. And
Yeah.
capitalism alone won't rid us of that.
Excellent. And thank you for pointing us to the intentionality of it. You're not going to accidentally remove racism just by getting rid of capitalism. Go ahead, Kia.
Excuse me. Yes, I really appreciate that because they get conflated. And I remember hearing something that there's not a problem in the world that ending racism won't solve. Once you end racism, everyone's free because it just topples all the other systems that are built on it. So I really appreciate that. And I feel like, too, it reminds me uh, of just domestic terror right here. When I think about capitalism, I think about economic oppression. And like literally, there's communities like the ones I grew up in where the poverty rate is like 40%. And so poverty is violence. I think poverty is a form of genocide. So anyway, I just really like that because sometimes we umbrella things
Yep.
and racism does not get the level of conversation and action that it needs. It's every day. It's
Yep.
subtle, it's insidious, it's all the stuff. So thank
Excellent.
you.
And so let me just continue to draw that out. And this is also a crucial point that, and I'm just going to be blunt about this, that a lot of white leftists need to confront. A lot of white leftists like to try to bypass white supremacy and to bypass doing the work of uprooting the internal structures of white supremacy from their own selves by leaning on class analysis instead. And will then say, well, the class struggle is the real struggle. And the racism is epiphenomenal. It's produced by the capitalism. When, in point of fact, as a historian, that is not a position that can actually be defended. The two emerge intertwined and interconnected, and they take their own specific trajectories. And one of the principal things that inhibits the development of a true left through the 1920s and 1930s is racial segregation and the fact that organized labor and white socialist movements are consistently ready to kick workers of color off of the line, to not extend to them the protections that they extend to one another. So unless we are intentionally attacking those isms, they are going to persist. And those specific ones of capitalism, white supremacy, and imperialism are so thoroughly interconnected with one another that you cannot effectively take any one of them without taking the other ones as well. And it doesn't mean that if you attack one, you're going to topple them all. It means you need to be tackling them simultaneously. What did Huey say? And I just want you to just hear him thinking. It was necessary to think much more creatively and independently about these complex interconnections. He's already said we're learning from the past, but we can't do it in a mechanical kind of way. We need to actually be looking at the situation that we're facing. And that means us here in 2025 in a scattered and fractured resistance community. We need to be thinking about how to take the appropriate corrective action so that we are able to tackle these interconnected forms of oppression. I'll go to Brother Stephen, and then in the interest of time, I'm going to have to move back on.
It's actually difficult following on from what you've said because you kind of like said some of the things I was going to say, but what I will just briefly mention is that he's to me he's implying the relationship between imperialism, war capitalism, and the various forms of oppression, including racism, including patriarchy, which are very much of the last 500 years,
Yep.
codified very clearly in the last 500 years, but actually stem from earlier aspects of European history. Because, for example, if you think about the Roman Empire, and if you think about the enslavement of the nameless in the Roman Empire, and if you think about racism in terms of you are Roman, you are a citizen, or you are a barbarian, and if you think about just the stuff around patriarchy there as well, we kind of get the European model, which is then applied from the 16th century on until now.
Excellent. Yeah, the Romans actually coined the term divide and conquer. That's their language on how to extend empire. And you can trace the roots of contemporary Islamophobia and imperialism through crusades 100%. But I think that you like, it was a really excellent choice of words and great wisdom in the way that you communicated the particular configuration of those pieces under which we now suffer. Those It's 500 years of interconnected elements of that imperialism, white supremacy, and capitalism that emerge at the same time, go through a set of iterations, and we are now dealing with all of those pieces, and they need to be fought, yes, collectively, but we need to have a sound understanding that You can't simply attack one of them and expect the other pieces mechanically to fall apart. That's not the way that that's going to work. And we definitely cannot use class analysis to bypass doing the work of healing from white supremacy. We can't use identity politics as a way of not facing up to the problems of class power dynamics. And we cannot allow domestic concerns to overshadow our responsibilities of uprooting the imperialism which nourishes all of the exploitative structures which destroy us. They're all of a piece. They say in the Wolof language, the language I learned to speak for my research, it's like coffee with milk, bangabole nan, bangabole tur. You either got to drink the whole thing or pour the whole thing out because they're all mixed together. You can't separate the coffee out from the milk. So they're all of a piece, and we got to pour the whole damn thing out because you drink any one of them and you get the rest. The toxins and the poisons are all embedded. They're all together, and we have to fight in systematic fashion against these. Looking at the time, and I'm going to get us back to the platform with apologies to folks that did have their hands raised. We will be able to get back to questions in just a moment, so you can hold your response for that time. And please humbly accept my apologies for not doing a better job managing time. But I'm just looking at the time and want to be respectful of folks. For those that have taken the online classes in the nonprofit space, especially the Muslim spiritual intensives I've done for many years, they'll understand that there have been times where the time on the flyer said 3 hours and we had a 4.5 hour session. And I'm trying to make sure, yeah, Shayla's nodding because she knows what that looks like. Especially like the last session of a 4 week installment, like that would be like a 4 hour class. So I'm trying to avoid that happening because I want you guys to come back tomorrow. So let me get back to the principles and back to the platform. So we've focused in a little bit on 2 and 3. I'm going to take a couple more at a time. Let me see. Everybody able to see that okay?
Four, we want decent housing, fit for the shelter of human beings. 5, we want decent education for our people that exposes the true nature of this decadent American society. We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in the present day society. 6,
Oh, you know what? Let's knock out 3.
we want completely free healthcare for all Black and oppressed people. 7,
Excellent. If you go to butchwearforgov.com, and I can say that because this is not a 501c3 event, so I can openly campaign with y'all in the room now. But when you go to the campaign website, those are the top items that we have: healthcare, housing, education, healthcare, housing, education, healthcare, housing, education, healthcare, housing, education. And the reason for that is because that's the core, the middlemost portion of the Panther program. Without the securing of these basic needs, all other struggles for liberation are fruitless. And it's the reason that this campaign is organized around bringing together mutual aid, direct action, and electoral politics, because without efforts to address those principal material concerns of human beings in fundamental ways, then all of our other political aspirations are hopelessly compromised. People cannot maximize their potential when they're hungry. People cannot maximize their potential when they are unhoused. People cannot maximize their potential when they are uneducated. And the systems of capitalism and imperialism and white supremacy are designed to systematically deny people access to these in order to keep them easily exploitable units of labor. Create housing scarcity, create healthcare scarcity. Back to the second point, employment scarcity. They intentionally, one of the CEOs, billionaire CEOs, I'm forgetting which one, said we need to engineer more pain in the employment market, Right now, workers have too many choices. The pain is built into and baked into those structures of capitalist exploitation, the housing, the healthcare, the education, the employment. They are all behind paywalls. And Huey writes in the beginning of Revolutionary Suicide, it was our aim and our aspiration to make sure that all of these survival programs were provided free, that no one pays a dime. Think back to that video that you guys were watching when we entered the room, that the Panthers, despite the fact that they were under constant assassination attempts, infiltration from COINTELPRO, subjected to warfare by the United States government, were nonetheless able to operate 13 entirely free healthcare clinics in Black communities throughout the country. That's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. You'll get your homework assignment, before we end class today. But how the Panthers were able to create programs that met these basic needs: healthcare, housing, education, despite the incredible material constraints and political constraints under which they labored, should put us all to shame. The resources that we have at our disposition and the potential organizational capacity that we have as our disposition, literally just the people in this room, dwarfs what the Panthers had access to. The Panthers, at the height of their power, had perhaps 2,000 members nationwide. There are 2,700 people currently registered today on Revolutionary Learning Community. So what are we doing? Why are we incapable of producing similar kinds of outcomes? Because we have not taken the appropriate lessons from the principles and the practices of our forebears, the lessons both for better and for worse. The misogyny was real. We're going to get into that tomorrow. It was a real problem. Eldridge Cleaver, who became the kind of leader of the Panthers while Huey was locked up, was an actual serial rapist. Our good sister Talaba Shakir, based in Los Angeles, was one of that founding Los Angeles Black Panther Party group, is writing a memoir about this. They literally would make arguments that like sexual access was a right for the male leadership. So yeah, we have work to do, both learning from the positive and healing from the negative. Let's get into a couple of the key pieces. The education piece first. Let me pull up a slide. I already quoted Malcolm, that only a fool lets his enemy educate his children. Assata Shakur said that they will never give you the education that is needed to overthrow them. You are never going to get from your oppressor the education that is needed for you to overthrow them. And that's why the Panthers insisted on accurate teaching of history and our place in contemporary society as fundamental to liberation. Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is the best thing that you can read to kind of think about the theory of this, but that education is either emancipatory or it is part of the systems of oppression. The great thinkers that led these revolutionary movements were almost always autodidacts. They were people that taught themselves. Malcolm, so you see the Malcolm shades, right? Malcolm had his eyes when he went into prison. He wore glasses when he came out. His transformation was reading by very low light through the middle of the night on the floor of his cell, reading everything that he could get his hands on and trying to think outside of the frameworks in which he had been miseducated. Huey Newton writes in Revolutionary Suicide that he was functionally illiterate into his early 20s. He could not read. He had to teach himself to read first. One of his brothers helped him, and he was ashamed before he could get into Merritt College, now Oakland Community College, where he engages those student groups that lead to his eventual radicalization. But what you see in people like Huey and Malcolm are people who have never been indoctrinated into the systems of thought inside the society, so they think radically in lateral ways. The one of the most important assets that we have in the revolutionary struggle, the political struggle in which we must engage, is that independence of thought from the systems that oppress us. Malcolm put it this way. He said, never let your enemy tell you how many of you there are. He was talking about never let your prospects for political success be dictated to you by your opponent. And then he continued on to say, he said, never let the man that you are against form your opinions for you. You are going to be told that independent political organizing is fruitless, that it can't happen, third parties can't win. That's all conditioning and it's all programming. That is all media hype. That is all an effort to control the narrative because they understand that, as my favorite MC, Wise Intelligent, puts it, narrative scripts human behavior the way that code scripts computers. The stories that we tell produce our social reality that makes the outcome. That's the reason why Malcolm was so intent on the study of history, why the Panthers were so intent on the study of history. Malcolm said, of all of our fields of study, history is best qualified to reward our research. And the reason is an independent reading of the past gives you all of the armament that you need to approach whatever confronts you in the contemporary moment, as long as you are not trying to mechanically cut and paste the solutions, as long as you are trying to understand the fundamental similarities and differences that are extant in the moment in which you must engage, in which you must act, what to bring forward from the past, what to leave in the past. What to take because it works, but it needs to be modified to work here. And that requires a kind of independent, creative thinking that, frankly, I mean, our intellectual class lacks, much less our political class. I mean, let's just be real about that. It's it's the only qualification that I have to be leading a class like this. That man ain't never had no real estate in here or in here for me. It's the only qualification that I submit to you. Lead a PhD or any of the other, that's the only qualification that I think is of any significance in this moment, is that all of my efforts to try to deduce the appropriate political and social interventions are independent of the intellectual and categorical framing of the oppressive system. Back to the program. Let's say a word. We said something about education. Healthcare is going to be crucial. The reading. So I'll just give you guys now. Matter of fact, I'll cut to the chase. Everybody wants to know the homework assignment. I know how classes work. Let's see here. Hope if I can do this a little more quickly. Here we go. Everybody seeing that? Okay, so you're not going to read this book overnight, but everybody is going to read some of this book tonight. Okay, and the book is the Black Panther Party's Service to the People Programs. This is, and our good brother, Dr. Cornell West, writes the foreword to this. For copyright reasons, I'm not putting the link to the PDF online on the campaign website, but any of y'all can find it. And if somebody should happen to put it into the chat, I don't really have anything to do with that. So, so just if somebody should happen to put it into the chat, so be it, but there's a full PDF of this available online so that people are able to consult it. I want everybody to take this seriously as a homework assignment, is that the elements of mutual aid that you are most passionate about, spend some time reading about how the Panthers structured their interventions into those domains, because those were the places where the Panthers were most effective and produced unprecedented outcome. I mean, I ate from a free breakfast program in Washington, D.C. when we were dirt poor because the Panthers had made it uh, um, so popular in Oakland and with their nationwide programs that eventually this becomes national policy to have these hot breakfast programs in school. They didn't exist before the Panthers made them a thing. And when the Panthers made them a thing, then it ended up shaping a whole bunch of policy more broadly. So those survival programs, the ones that are the most meaningful ones to you, spend some time on this particular homework assignment. Um, that's the book, and keep that as a reference work as we move forward in these conversations about how to thread together mutual aid, direct action, and electoral politics. And because I know people don't read, um, the other homework assignment is a movie. And I know that, even UCSB undergrads, for whom my classes are just speed bumps in their drinking schedule, they are usually able to, to do movie-based assignments. So if you are able to tonight have watch party with your friends on Judas and the Black Messiah. Um, this is going to help set us up for tomorrow because Judas and the Black Messiah is the story of Bill O'Neill and Fred Hampton. Bill O'Neill is essentially the FBI informant, COINTELPRO agent who sets Fred Hampton and Mark Clark up to be murdered. Not to, spoiler alert, right? I mean, we know how the movie's going to end. But it's a really, really powerful telling. Our good brother, Chairman Fred Jr., that's the program that we've been working on, is to do a screening here on the West Coast together. He strongly recommends, people view this film. And so I strongly recommend it as well. I rewatched it, last night. So that is your homework assignment. And we will have some discussion based on the homework assignment tomorrow. So everybody got the two homework assignments? Okay, cool. Back to the platform. We'll finish that up and then we'll take questions.
Seven. 6. We want completely free healthcare for all Black and oppressed people. 7. We want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of Black people, other people of color, and all oppressed people inside the United States. 8. We want an immediate end to all wars of aggression. 9. We want freedom for all Black and oppressed people now held in U.S. federal, state, county, city, military prisons, and jails. We want trials by a jury of peers for all persons charged with so-called crimes under the laws of this country.
Excellent. 7, 8, 9, again of a piece, right? 7 and 9 about police brutality and the carceral state. And 8, sitting right in between them, the piece that leverages our imperial boomerang in this contemporary free Palestine moment, in this contemporary abolish ICE moment, is that whatever happens in those foreign wars is going to be part of the state police apparatus that is going to be used to destroy you and to control you here. 7, 8, and 9 are a single integral whole that are about facing up to the interrelationship between imperialism abroad and a police state at home. And what Black folks were trying to warn people about for a good long time now. I mean, I've told this story before. I was stopped. They said in the video that Huey was stopped 50 times in 1966. I was stopped 17 times. I guess this would have been 1991. From the time I got my driver's license to before I turned 18, I was 16 and a half when I got my license. In a year and a half, I was stopped 17 times for driving while Black. Never ticketed. One time, an officer drew his service weapon and pointed it at my face when I reached into my jacket for the identification that he had asked me to produce. And many of us have been screaming, and a lot of people finally heard that call in 2020, when George Floyd was choked out over 8 minutes and 46 seconds, about what the ultimate and eventual cost of allowing slave catchers to run loose in a society was going to be. And y'all ain't hear me then. Y'all hear me now. Y'all understand now that, well, you know what? Let's let Huey make the point.
They're there to contain us. In America, black people are treated very much as the Vietnamese people or any other colonized people because we're brutalized. The police in our community occupy our area, our community, as a foreign troop occupies territory. And the police are there not to, in our community, not to promote our welfare or for our security and our safety, but they're there to contain us, to brutalize us and murder us because they have their orders to do so. And just as the soldiers in Vietnam have their orders to destroy the Vietnamese people, the police in our community couldn't possibly be there to protect our property because we own no property. They couldn't possibly be there to see that we receive the due process of law for the simple reason that the police themselves deny us the due process of law. And so it's very apparent that the police are only in our community, not for our security, but the security of the business owners in the community, and also to see that the status quo is kept intact. In America,
I don't know that I've ever seen anybody do better than that in a minute and 9 seconds. uh, Huey's built different. God rest his soul. Um, so the relationship between that occupying force abroad and that occupying force of the internal enemy, that's what's driving COINTELPRO, right? That's what's driving the efforts to stop the rise of a Black Messiah. That's what's leading to the assassination of Fred Hampton, is that ultimately this is one modality of white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist power, and it has two faces. Aimé Césaire, who the great Caribbean intellectual, a friend of Frantz Fanon and one of his most important intellectual influences, is the first person that I know to ever utilize the term imperial boomerang. And he says that fascism is what happens when white people start doing to one another what they've done to the colonized world. And it was that reading of Black people as an internal colony of the United States of America, the reading of indigenous people as an internal colony. And of course, I mean, we don't have to say in this audience that 93% of Mexican Americans have indigenous ancestry. The war on the Latino community is a war on the indigenous population. It is a continuation of the genocidal violence that established the United States of America in the first place. There is a direct line from my Seminole ancestors through the Trail of Tears right through Abolish ICE in LA. And unless and until we understand the interrelated nature of those systems of oppression, I've talked about this at length. You guys can come back and ask me about it. But literally, the first police chief in the city of Berkeley, Augustin Vollmer, is a person who learns his military strategies that he applies to policing in Berkeley and in Oakland from his efforts to as a U.S. occupier in the Philippines. He essentially takes counterinsurgency techniques that were used against the Filipino nationalist movement and applies them to surveilling and making war against Black communities here. There has always been a direct relationship between these. And if you get a chance, this is not officially a homework assignment. We'll call this one an extra credit assignment. But if you, and not to give a shout out to Netflix, but I don't know where else you can find this. If somebody can find a bootleg copy so that Netflix don't get a cut, all the better. But there's an excellent documentary called Power, which is about the history of American policing. And in Power, the history of American policing, in a very short period of time, they're able to demonstrate what scholars have been working on for a couple of decades, which is that American policing emerges from three cradles. The first is slave patrols. The second is essentially patrol of newly stolen lands in the expansion of the West. So it's about containing and controlling the indigenous population and keeping the settler population protected from efforts to get land back. And then the third cradle is in the northeastern cities, where it is literally the largest corporations that fund the creation of the first public police departments in order to have those police departments break up labor organizations and strike. So it's literally an anti-socialist organization structure. So just think about this. Policing stolen people, stolen land, and stolen labor. That's where our policing comes from. And when you understand that, then that internal imperial expansion, that manifests destiny. Of course, what happens in Palestine and Iraq and Afghanistan is going to be visited upon us because it's always been that way. From the time that those 13 colonies declared their independence from England, because England was threatening to cut off the money for the imperial expansion. Read Gerald Horne's History of the American Revolution. They were the British were tired of underwriting armed resistance to slave rebellions and land theft wars. And that's why those 13 colonies write their little Declaration of Independence. Because they were afraid that the Somerset case in 1772 was going to create a precedent for the end of slavery in those colonies. Again, an accurate understanding of history so that we're not seduced by this mythology that these were somehow freedom fighters. They anyway, let me finish the presentation so that we can get to the questions. I just want to come back to those 7, 8, 9, the last part being the carceral state specifically. What Huey and Bobby, and by the way, in Revolutionary Suicide, Huey Newton he said, we sat down with pen and paper and we set aside a couple of days to write up the platform. He said, in the end, it took us about 20 minutes. So in the end, it took us about 20 minutes. So they literally just sat down because these are basic demands and direct frontline grievances, concerns of every single individual person. And when we think about our organizing capacity, being responsive to the basic needs of people, thinking in terms of housing, thinking in terms of education, thinking in terms of employment, thinking of the things that matter the most, To people who are not ideological and who are not read in on the theory or the principles, but know what they need, and at the same time being informed and shaped by revolutionary principles so that you know how to utilize those breakfast programs. Were not just breakfast programs, those are the beginnings of political education. That's where you start to undo the learning process. That's where you start to take control of educating your children instead of having your enemies educate them. You get them in preschool before they go in and start making that pledge of allegiance to that shit flag. Teach them something. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is reported to have said, the hearts of the children of Adam naturally incline to those who bring benefit to them. Go out and meet the people's basic needs. Their hearts will incline to you, and then they will hear what you have to say. Show up in service to community. I'll say more about that in a moment. That carceral state has never, not one time in its history, produced fairness or justice for people of color, for the oppressed communities, because it can't. It's not structurally designed to that. First of all, how does an outlaw state make laws in the first place? Nothing that the United States of America's government does is legal. None of the land theft, none of the genocide, even the practice of slavery as it existed here was a direct violation of its own laws. So you have a completely outlaw rogue regime making laws and applying them in selective fashion. That definition of fascism, there is an in-group that the law protects but does not bind, and out-groups that the law binds but does not protect. That law is an instrument of power of the state. And that understanding that when that is the case, then it is impossible for the law to deliver justice to people that it is designed to produce injustice upon, to people that it is designed to oppress. You still can't get justice for police killing a Black person because at the foundation of this country, that's not a murder, that's a property crime. The indemnity is owed to the owner of the slave that was killed. There is no damages or justice for a murder. Do y'all understand my words? So a system that's designed to function in that way cannot simply be reformed. Revolution is necessary. And we're going to get to this a lot tomorrow, understanding that distinction between revolutions in these systems and simply reforming them. That is the fundamental threat that the Panthers, and not just the Panthers, but also the All African People's Revolutionary Party founded by Kwame Ture, that is, and other groups that were sometimes in conflict and sometimes in concert with the Panthers. And there are lessons to be learned from that as well. But these revolutionary groups understood that reform of a fundamentally oppressive, unjust, capitalist, white supremacist system cannot produce justice in its outcomes. And that's why they never ignored electoral political options, but neither did they rely on them solely. And that's not something that just comes out of the Panthers practice. Huey Newton ran for Congress, for God's sake. Don't tell me that electoral politics can't be part of a revolutionary cocktail. It absolutely has been. But it's just that those folks never understood the intervention in the electoral politics as being sufficient towards producing the outcome, because that would only produce reform, not revolutionary change. Kwame Ture put it this way. He said that that is the height of bourgeois irresponsibility, thinking that you can show up once every 4 years and you fulfilled your responsibility. He said, I know that the vote is only a tool for organizing my people. Electoral politics is a tool to organize people. And when we get to the Q&A, I'll say a little bit more about my own kind of theory and practice of that through this campaign. For now, I want Malcolm to weigh in on this particular point. Then we'll come back to Kathleen Cleaver. We'll get the last point. And again, we'll have a good 30, 40 minutes for Q&A. So let me pull this up. You guys that are doing this for the first time, this might seem long-winded, but I'm actually, in comparison to previous classes, insanely disciplined on time. And everybody that has a huge smirk on their face has been in these online intensives before and have seen this thing come off the rails for 4 hours at a time. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's good content at all times, but it's not always the most time effective. So I'm trying to get better at that now that I'm running for office and everything. So we're going to go to Malcolm for this. Not a Panther, but foundational for the approach of the Panthers. Everybody seeing that?
In order to do this, we're starting a voters registration drive. We have to get everybody in Harlem registered, not as Democrats or Republicans, but registered as independents. We're going to organize a corps of brothers and sisters who, after the city is mapped out, they won't leave one apartment house door not knocked on. There won't be a door in Harlem that will not have been knocked on, to see that whatever black face lives behind that door is registered to vote by a certain time this year. Nobody will have an excuse not to be registered. We'll ask him, let us see your card. If you don't have the sense of responsibility to get registered, we'll move you out of town. It's going to be the ballot or the bullet. After we get our people registered, we can then organize that voting strength and channel it in the direction that will get immediate results for the benefit of our people. We can sweep our enemies right out of office, but we will not be able to do it sitting around talking about select and elect your own candidates.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
Come on, Amy.
Today in this special broadcast, we begin with the words of Frederick Douglass. Born into slavery around 1818, Douglass
Note to self, turn off autoplay next video for the for Sunday's class. No Free Democracy Now! Plug, Jimmy. No, because Amy she went full vote blue no matter who. She did everything that she could to keep us off of her show. And it was only because I trolled her every single public appearance from the Breakfast Club through everything else, saying, Amy, when do we get to get on the show? Did she even let us on the show at all? Making me mad. Y'all are bringing up hurt feelings. Let me try to refocus. Malcolm. What did Malcolm say? Malcolm said that we are going to leverage this tool. We cannot leave a weapon of this potential strength unutilized in this struggle. So he said, nobody's registering as Democrat or Republican. And you know, if you've listened to me talk before, why Malcolm said that. Because Malcolm's saying the liberal is a fox. It bares its teeth. You think that it's smiling, but you're on the menu. The conservative is a wolf. When it bares its teeth, it's into a vicious snarl that leaves the Negro with no illusion as to where he stands. We're caught between two predators that differ only in the modality of the hunt. And those are represented in these two parties, the Democrat and the Republican Party. Nothing can be gained through either of them. And the reason goes back into those politics. If you read the great Walter Rodney, right, Guyanese intellectual, the first generation of PhDs trained in African history, also, Black Marxist socialist organizer in Guyana. He's assassinated in Guyana because of his organizing activities. My biggest academic and intellectual hero, my principal role model. Walter Rodney was dedicated to that same kind of organizing. But that Marxist critique, he identifies essentially that these are the liberal and the conservative pieces are just part of the structure of bourgeois capitalism. You cannot think of the distinction between liberals and conservatives as a distinction between right and left if you're thinking of things in terms of right and left. There is the bourgeois and the anti-capitalist, and those two are opposed. And liberalism is just therefore the polite face of empire and capitalism and white supremacy. It's the one that has a basic minimum baseline of decorum that is designed to facilitate the ongoing perpetuation of the systems of capitalism, white supremacy, and imperialism. From the standpoint of the Black radical tradition as a whole, not just the Panthers, liberals are ops. That is not a point that is discussed by any of them. That's taken for granted and understood. And that's not a part of our contemporary political discourse in the way that it needs to be. But it is absolutely crucial piece to understanding. And Malcolm said, and sorry to follow this through, but I think it's worth finishing. Malcolm said in a different version. So that speech that I showed you was a segment of a speech that Malcolm wrote called the Ballot or the Bullet. He delivers it because he does things extemporaneously, oftentimes as I do as well. So he delivers different versions of it, in at least two different times. But when he's making his argument in the Ballot and the Bullet, in one of those, he says that the white liberal is the most dangerous thing in the Western Hemisphere. And when he says that, white conservatives are turning dogs and fire hoses on protesters. White conservatives are hanging Negroes from trees. White conservatives are putting bullets in the back of the head of white voting rights activists in Mississippi and burying them beside the road in shallow graves. And Malcolm said what he said. And the reason is that if politics is war without bloodshed, then in war, an open enemy is less dangerous to you than a concealed enemy. An enemy that pretends to be a friend, says some of the right things, does some of the right things, brings you into confidence, is there walking right behind you because that's where they need to be for them to stab you in the back. So Malcolm is saying that we need to get people off of these plantations and start to organize our own voting bloc. And if you want to know the theory behind the infrastructure of the campaign that we're trying to build in the state of California, Malcolm just said it. We're going to knock on every door virtually, in person, and in calls and try to get everybody registered outside of that duopoly, because everyone is fundamentally dissatisfied with it, because this late stage capitalism has started to apply all of the same pressure to the even the white working class in the same way that it has kept Black people and people of color under its heel for centuries. That the heightening of contradictions, as the Marxists like to frame it, has made the problem so acute that now so many people are actually ready to get off of this duopoly, get out of this plantation. But one of the principal lessons to take from the Panthers is to meet people where they're at and speak to them about their basic needs: employment, healthcare, housing, education. Don't batter people with theory and ideology. Meet basic needs. And then people will start to wonder, what are they thinking about that this is how they move? Why are these people different? It's the reason why we're trying to reinforce all the mutual aid and direct action activities that are taking place throughout the state of California in service, rather than trying to instrumentalize those groups as voters. We're trying to show up. And this campaign is trying to put ourselves at the disposition of the people that are doing the work akin to what the Panthers were doing, and to thread together those communities of liberation and resistance into a single political movement. That's the task that we have at hand. Last of the Panther principles, and then we'll go to questions. Is everybody able to see that?
And 10, we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, peace, and people's community control of modern technology.
Let me go back just a second so I can leave that up on the screen. Everybody able to see that okay? We end where the initial presentation where we began it, right? That this is about um, developing the modalities to meet people's basic needs, that the principles that are behind that 10-point platform are about very concrete, tangible deliverables that are of concern to most folks. The majority of the population, to go back to Rodney's analysis of the Russian, you see that? Rodney's analysis of the Russian Revolution, the majority of the Russian population are not Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks are the ones that are organizing most effectively to meet people's basic needs. That what will allow us to expand and to make the kind of impact, to punch above our weight, the way that the Panthers punched above their weight, and we'll talk about some of the challenges that are yet that we'll still need to overcome, is by focusing on these basic needs and messaging that is about reaching out to communities who are in desperate need of land back, who are in desperate need of, I mean, how many food deserts are there just in the state of California? Forget, across the country, not just in urban neighborhoods, not just in Black neighborhoods, but paradoxically in impoverished rural communities, food deserts right next to the farms, because the agro businesses have taken over the food desert. And just like a colonial economy, it's just a colonial monocrop that's grown there, not anything that anybody can eat. That dialectic between the colonial dynamics that are functioning inside our society is profoundly instructive. Housing is a human right. Tuition-free education, higher education in the state of California, untethering our public education from local property taxes, which will guarantee to reproduce class inequalities in the society in perpetuity. In perpetuity, permanent underclasses. clothing, justice, peace. And man, how far ahead were the Panthers? That last one, I had forgotten that that was in there. But imagine, like it's one of the reasons why we have our own platform so that it's private, that they can't steal the data, and also so Meta can't surveil us and what we do, how we move. All of these pieces are now in control even more heavily of an extractive capitalist class. The necessity to apply the Panther model at scale and not just inside of Black communities, but across communities more broadly has never been more urgent. When you do the homework assignment, I know nobody's going to read, but when you watch Judas and the Black Messiah, pay attention to the scene where Fred Hampton brokers the deal between the young lords, the young patriots, and the Panthers and forms the first Rainbow Coalition. Because that right there, God rest his soul, that's right there is what got him killed. Because being able to bridge rather than erase racial distinctions, ethnic distinctions, and to get people focused on common enemy, that is the most dangerous, dangerous thing. It's been the most dangerous thing since Bacon's Rebellion, when the English authorities first realized, man, we better start, operationalizing some white supremacy the way that the Spanish and the Portuguese have. Otherwise, we're going to have a major problem with white indentured servants and Indians and Negroes all coming for our necks. Undoing that and building those kind of bridges, and those bridges are in this room. Look at this room. Look at this room, right? We have an opportunity in this moment to build something that will be to the measure of the fight that's in front of us. And as I said to start these comments, as dark as things were in the 60s with the Watts riots, the assassination of Malcolm, eventually the assassination of Dr. King, those are the things that are surrounding the rise of the Panthers. Understand that the capacity of surveillance and death dealing that the United States government has at its disposal in 2025 compared to 1964, child's play. Which means that we are going to have to build disciplined structures of mutual aid, direct action, and political organization, and they're going to have to transcend these boundaries within which we've been taught to struggle. That's my opening session. Let's take some questions. And I'm looking at the time. So we started 11 minutes past the hour. That means that according to the schedule, I'm going to try to get us wrapped by 1:11 today. I'm going to try to, I'm not making any promises, but I will promise not to go crazy and keep people here extra long. I'm going to try to finish very close to on time. With that in mind, please ask a question and try to be disciplined in the delivery of the question. And I promise to try to be disciplined in the answering of the question and not be too long-winded, just so that most folks can get themselves in the conversation. Go ahead, Sister Shayla. And Shayla's a longtime veteran. Took some of the very first Inca Scholars courses after the George Floyd murder back in 2020. So welcome back.
Assalamu alaikum, Professor, and good afternoon to everybody. And Professor knows my questions are rarely simple, but I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible. The principles, the 10 principles that you put forward. Yeah. Again, you have explained that these have to evolve over time to match what the positions are today, conditions are, and all of those things. Now, politically, I am at a loss as how do we grasp this task, because the world has shifted internationally and we are more aware internationally. Mm-hmm. I'll give you two examples, two in very distinct contrast. A lot of us are aware of the situation in Palestine, and we came into resistance work because of that. The recent New York mayoral election in which Mamdani won, He gives all the basic principles, not all of them, but a good majority of those that are in these 10 principles, um, subsidized healthcare, bus access, public transport, all of these things which are essential. But he has also stated that Israel has a right to exist. That's one thing. So where do we go from there? Second, and this is a fairly local thing, so nobody else would be aware of it, but I had the good fortune of holding a forum between two city hall candidates within the city of Irving in Dallas itself. One was backed by Zionist money, the other one was anti-Zionist. And you know how hard it is to get Muslim to go out and vote, Professor Ware. It's a known thing. But we pushed for it, and that's why I held the forum so that the candidates could come in, show their points, and what is and is it that they stand for. The Zionist candidate did not show up to the forum. The anti-Zionist candidate did, and very pro-Palestine, Catholic Christian. And he was like, because the Pope.
Is this Robert Smith?
No, this
Okay.
is Sergio Porras. Again,
Okay.
it's a very local election.
Understood.
And he's like, because the Pope has spoken out, the former Pope had spoken out against the genocide in Palestine. I, as somebody of faith, we followed through that. But in his talking points about the local city, he was like, I am going to up the funding for police, which was already pretty high in the city of Irving. It's already 54 million. He's going to up that because that's the solution for crime. But as we all know, upping funding for police is always a bad idea, especially with a community that is majority people of color. So these are two distinctions that have sort of exist, that you are like pro people, but also Zionist, and you are anti-Zionist, but not entirely pro people.
Excellent. Yeah. So this is exactly the distinction between reform and revolution that we're talking about. And to take this to Mamdani, specifically, and I'm going to put my cards on the table, and I've spoken about this publicly. Mahmoud Mamdani, Zoran's father, was an academic mentor for me, not one of my closest academic mentors, but somebody that I believe in. I know, I teach his works. We've had lengthy discussions about politics. I believe Zoran has been trained up in all of the right ways, especially about anti-colonial and decolonial epistemology. And so I'm rooting for Zoran, and I believe that his heart is in the right place. But you would have to have not one, but all of my children at gunpoint before you got me to say Israel has right to exist. There's no configuration of circumstances that makes that statement okay. And he is going to be subjected to efforts to both break him and claim him, and we're already seeing that, the Aosification of Mamdani, underway. And I hope that he can stay strong, but there is nothing that, and don't get me wrong, they asked me about it, but there's nothing that you could do to get me to put on a blue genocide uniform and run for office. And understand that the DSA, and by the way, we have DSA people that are some of the most active volunteers and activists for our campaign. So I'm not taking a shot at DSA, because people make decisions on how they think that they can most effectively intervene in whatever their specific circumstances are. And in a lot of particular environments, DSA is the best, or has appeared to be the best way of intervening. But I could not run with a D next to my name under any circumstances. And the reason is that as it's currently configured, and in any of its recent historical configurations, there is no way of actually operationalizing an anti-capitalist liberation politics inside a capitalist white supremacist party. That's a fundamental contradiction. And it is a fundamental contradiction that, bruh, there's three options. Zoran Mamdani will either be broken by the Democratic Party, he will break the Democratic Party, or he will leave the Democratic Party. Because that party is what it is. And it was not redeemable in Malcolm's time, and it's certainly not redeemable in ours. With respect to the other one, the one thing that I just want to say about that is that the compromising on the carceral state, people are now seeing the cost of that. That just the new funding that is earmarked for ICE makes this internal Gestapo force the 18th largest military on the planet. The top are all of the US Armed Forces. Then there's a couple of countries in the that jump in, and then ICE. So there's no playing now, and I'm an abolitionist. I do believe that abolition is not something that can be instantaneous. I think that you need to create situations where people's basic needs are met, and that you have to have public safety and law enforcement functioning as you move towards sustainable abolitionist outcomes in the long term. I don't think that you get to skip steps and just jump to a society that doesn't have any form of police. But if you understand where police come from, then you know that they got to go. And that many of the most flourishing pre-colonial societies throughout the world were societies that didn't have a police force. And we're nonetheless able to secure public safety. So no, there's no compromise on either of those issues, and that those are the two faces. You know, the police state at home and the imperialism abroad. And if you fail on any of those, you ain't a revolutionary, and that's that. Cisco.
Hi. Thank you very much. I believe I first discovered you on 4th of July on a podcast one year, and I just felt so much less alone.
Glad to hear that. It is isolating when the world is going completely unglued, and you're like, am I the only one seeing this? Like, am I the only one that can't sleep because of this? So yeah, no, I know.
Right.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah, so in a little context, I reside in a college town in Georgia. I worked in a sexual assault center across the street from where Laken Riley was murdered. So the political climate here sucks. I do work a lot with my vulnerable communities, doing like rapid response and things of that nature. My question is, do you have any literature to recommend me on how to work with my fellow ghost face community members? I literally have had the cops caught on me. Like, the local Democratic Party has tried to put terrorism charges on me for saying I was going to go shoot someone, and it happened to be the day before the candidate announced he's running for mayor. Is there any literature to help me like strategically communicate with my community that thinks that I'm a threat when, and then it's also concerning seeing some of these people start to get involved with the vulnerable communities that do not hesitate to call the police. That's concerning.
Yeah. Excellent. So this is important. Everyone that hasn't already done so, and if somebody can just put the Revolutionary Learning Community link and the Revolutionary Book Club link into the chat. So one of the things that we're doing is that we have our own essential, like a clearinghouse of rapid response and ICE Watch and other mutual aid and direct action organizations with whom we have personal relationships and can vouch for the integrity of those that are involved. And we're trying to bring those mutual aid, rapid response, and ICE Watch folks together into a network. And that's taking place only inside our proprietary database. So Meta can't have eyes on it. Nobody else has eyes on it, and that's information that's not shared with anybody. So I can happily connect you with resources on how to practically do this, by the people that are most engaged effectively on the ground. And depending on like where you are, we're literally putting together a network of local resources. If you are interested in mutual aid or Ice Watch or direct action in these particular areas, here are the people that are vetted by the people that are closest to us, and therefore we can vouch for them and connect you with resources in your area. That's one of the most, and let me just put my cards on the table, that's one of the most important outcomes that I want to come out of this particular gathering, is that all of you that are already doing this work or connected with orgs or have resources, to send those in so that we can add those and establish our own contacts. And we have campaign staff that's reaching out. We have a 501c3 that's for purely educational purposes, and we have a 501c4 that can do political action and direct aid and mutual action. We can reinforce orgs that are already on the ground, and we can fundraise independently and get resources to the groups that are doing the work on the ground. So that's properly speaking a homework assignment for Sunday. But I want everyone to already start thinking about that. Is that who are the people that you know and you trust, that the connections that are in your area, so that people like Cisco can be branched in with people that are already doing the work. This campaign is not seeking to reinvent the wheel. It's seeking to bring together the people that are most effectively organizing these activities on the ground. So, for example, like NorCal Resist here in Sacramento, Fernando Deveras, who was on earlier, I think he had to hop off for another event. He does these in Santa Ana, right? We've got some of the people that do this already the best. As part of the extended family. So rather than, like me holding a training, go to their training, right? And we're
I
going to,
actually,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I saw his, when I saw him earlier speak, I was like, oh my gosh, I have a friend that's on the police oversight committee, and he recently got in trouble for speaking at a city hall meeting with me. Well, we both spoke on the same topic, but he got in trouble because he's on the committee. So I sent him the video of Fernando speaking of his similar experience. Like, you're not alone. You're all going through it.
Yeah. So all of that is just to say that, and I try to be brief, but I'm not doing a very good job of it. I'm just going to say one thing about the kind of theory of the campaign in this regard. Um, Typical bourgeois instrumentalist politics goes to communities and says, "This is something that you're interested in. This is my platform. My platform meets your interest. Vote for me." And that is, in my understanding, an extractive colonial bourgeois electoral relationship. That a political party, in my view, is supposed to be a means through which siloed forms of mobilization around specific issues becomes collective organization. That a political party is meant to be able to bring people together to contest power. That's what the Panthers were doing. That's what Kwame Ture was saying. He said, "I know that the vote is just a way of organizing my people." So the idea that we're operating with instead is to say, these are the orgs that are already doing the work on the ground. How can we provide you with a platform, more visibility? How can we thread together the networks of people that are already doing the work so that we're having a force multiplier effect, that we're funneling, instead of having 4 separate trainings on rapid response and Ice Watch that are being done by folks in Santa Ana and Sacramento and in San Diego and LA, that we bring those groups together and that we put all of those people into a single training, so that instead of having 4 separate ones, that you have one, and then those other 3 teams that would have been organizing an overlapping activity can instead be extending the work into another domain. That's what organizing is meant to do. It's meant to keep us from reproducing the same gestures in dispersed fashion, so that we can have more force. Malcolm said, "We are not outnumbered, we are out-organized." And part of what's happening is that a lot of our efforts are being reproduced over and over again on a micro level, And if we had a little more organization and coordination, we could have a greater impact. So it's a crucial piece. And thank you for making sure that that got into the conversation. Brother Stephen, you had your hand up earlier, please jump in.
Firstly, to try and contextualize, I'm speaking to you from the UK.
No, no one would have guessed.
Oh,
sorry,
I thought I managed. I really thought I managed to hide my accent.
It's an accent joke. Yeah, that's an accent joke. Sorry.
My wife was on another one of your courses previously around political activism and spirituality. I liked the way that you picked up the relationship of certain groups of points. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say, just to contextualize, is that she and I are both psychotherapists. We're both Islamic counselors. It's a therapeutic model we developed. It's something we practice. I run a service. And that's the context of this particular query. I noticed earlier on you picked up the relationships between justice and peace in terms of internal and external militarized oppression, and the relationships between housing, health, and education. But there's something I want to talk to you. I'm hoping that you will provide some guidance tomorrow in relation to. And that's the interaction between the mental health industrial complex and the prison industrial complex. Mm-hmm. Because if I think about the way things are now, and I'm not just thinking about this in terms of the Muslim Ummah or thinking about this just in terms of minoritized communities, though it's pertinent for both of those. If I think about the way that the political structures have organized at this point in a far clearer way than they were ever in the 60s, we now have an understanding that the battle is psychopolitical. The battle against our resilience, the battle against our resistance is one in which the battle is either fought here, or if we become violent, it's fought through incarceration.
Yeah.
So in terms of how we take forward the principles, I am so hoping, as a mental health professional working in minoritized communities, but not purely spiritually, but spiritually in a way that relates to the politic of this time. Butch, I need you to talk to me about how we actually interact on these two fronts.
Thank you for that. Inshallah, God willing, we won't let you down tomorrow, since that's one of the principal subjects of conversation. I'll introduce it in just a brief fashion, and this will allow me to accomplish some of the setup for tomorrow. So one of the tensions inside the Panther movement was a cultural tension. You'll see it represented in Judas and the Black Messiah in the very first scene between revolutionary culture and a cultural revolution. The US organization, for example, were Black cultural nationalists, although they could be kind of political conservatives. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because you talked about the spiritual intensives that I've been doing for some time. Basically, what those were designed to do is utilize the resources of the African Islamic tradition to bridge that gap between revolutionary culture and a cultural revolution. And the aim has been to root ourselves in traditional forms of providing spiritual and ethical and psychological and moral resources that will allow us to heal from the trauma that empire, white supremacy, and capitalism have inflicted upon us. That if we are unable to be successful in undoing the harm, then we are guaranteed to reproduce the harm in whatever systems we would enact after this. Because hurt people hurt people. And if you don't believe it, ask a Zionist. You will literally go from being a concentration camp inmate to a concentration camp guard within weeks if you do not undo the harm that was done to you by supremacist, capitalist, imperialist systems. And whatever means that we have, whether Fanon, who provided this kind of a decolonial psychological model that was rooted in a discipline that was colonial, right? But it was an anti-colonial utilization of psychology, whether it is through our spiritual traditions, through our indigenous traditions. All of these are absolutely crucial to making us whole again, because we can design a a beautiful blueprint for how we want society to function. But if each of the individual human bricks in the structure is broken, then what will it avail us? So tomorrow's conversation is largely on the fact that when you listen to the internal Panther sources, a lot of them lament that that work of healing was not done, and therefore a lot of the patterns from previous negative behaviors got wired into the organization itself. And so this is one of the principal lessons that we have to learn, is that that dichotomy between revolutionary culture and cultural revolution. No, we need to root ourselves in all of those systems and traditions that we share that fully humanize us and that allow us to heal from the traumas and harms that these systems have inflicted upon us and that they've taught us to inflict upon ourselves and one another. None of us are innocent of these charges, right? We reproduce these harms because they are embedded in all our basic modalities of being. And that's what these education courses, the spiritual intensive specifically, have always been about. So this is agenda item number one for tomorrow. I'll go to Ugbad, Ugbad has been there since the beginning of the spiritual intensives, 5 years ago. And also just always a nice person to hear from. Assalamu alaikum, Ugbad. How are you?
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلا دكتور. Alhamdulillah. Thank you for sharing everything. Just want to make it brief and short. What you shared last thing, this is subhanAllah what I wanted to ask about, but inshallah I will give more inshallah details tomorrow. So quick question. If you can guide us to specific pages or chapters from the book, because it's over 150. So just if you can just tell us to focus on which chapters, inshallah.
Excellent. So the guidance that I gave was to scan the table of contents, and I can pull that up again. Yes, I think I can do that. Give me 1 second. So when I'm giving people advice, especially young people, and oftentimes my students will come to me with this on how do we get how do you get involved in activism or political work. What I usually tell them is to find the specific issues about which they're most passionate and allow that to be the thing that mediates their entry into the space. So my suggestion was to read through the survival programs and just here in terms of a table of contents and think through which ones you're most interested in learning a little bit more about, just a few pages of reading before tomorrow's session. If you get the chance, read the introduction to the volume by Cornel West, and then the other introduction by David Hilliard, who was a Panther activist who designed many of these programs, and especially his concluding remarks. I don't have that turned into a PowerPoint slide, but he talks about in the concluding remarks, everybody always asks, how did you do it? How, with so little, were you guys able to build so many free programs? And I think that if I were pointing people to just one thing to read, it would be his closing reflections on that. So I'll make sure that I get those page numbers directly into the onto the website so that you have a chance to study it, because I think that this is a huge part of our programming and conditioning. We have actually been programmed and conditioned to believe that these systems are unassailable, that they cannot be defeated, when in point of fact, imperialism is always doomed. It is always dying. Its end is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, our focus has to be on what are we going to be building? And that's where I would point people in the reading. And then from there, go to, like, if what you're most passionate about is basic education, if it's about basic survival needs, if it's about police work, whatever the piece is, read more about how the Panthers did that and bring that into the cipher tomorrow. And thank you for the excellent opportunity to elucidate, but I appreciate it greatly.
Thank you.
I've got three hands still left, and these are, I think, are the last three that I can take in order to be, moderately respectful of people's Saturday afternoons. So I've got Joe, Ajla, and Lisette, and those will be the last three.
Hi. So I was just this is sort of similar to another person's question I heard, but just sort of wondering how to call people in, especially liberal friends and family members. Um, yeah, I mean, how to get them to care about the revolution rather than the reform.
Mm. Yeah, so my answer to this is generally similar to the one that I just gave, but it's inflected slightly differently. So, um, if I was a liberal, which I'm not, and never have been, never will be, but if I was, I would find that the current iteration of the Democrats is so far to the right of where Ronald Reagan was in the 1980s that if I was actually interested in the things that liberals say that they are interested in, then I would be fundamentally opposed to the politics of the contemporary Democrat Party, because they're not democratic. They don't vote for nothing. They do not elect. They appoint. They anoint. They who voted for Kamala to get the nomination? Anybody remember? Nobody did. That's who, right? They name their candidates. So what my intervention strategy with Democrat associated liberals, and I'll just be honest, it's somewhat disingenuous in the sense that I don't believe in their liberal goals, but I take their liberal goals at face value. And because I think that what's beneath them is a concern that there is actually a basic moral concern for human decency that's driving most liberals. And most liberals can actually be unplugged from liberalism when they are introduced to its bloody history, like over the course of time. It's just that that's a very hard spontaneous deprogramming like in a single moment. It has to be more processual than that. So dismissing people as misguided or as ops, like don't get me wrong, they're ops in the big picture, but they've been taught and conditioned, they've been programmed this way. You can't think of them as evil, right? What did Huey Newton say? Huey said in Revolutionary Suicide, he said, I discourage the comrades from talking down to people even when they're coming at you from a bourgeois perspective. Malcolm said, he said, do not be in a hurry to condemn. There was a day that you did not know what you know today. So you have to look at these as opportunities to teach, and the best opportunities to teach are to meet people where they are and frame things in terms of the values that they hold dear. Most liberals believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They believe in equality, even if they haven't thought of that equality as being basically conditioned by white supremacy and imperialism, and connected to a blood-soaked history. So you appeal on the basis of the way that the current political authorities that the Democrat Party is putting forward is incapable of delivering even on what liberalism says that it wants. So it's the reason why I'm always banging on AOC and Bernie Sanders, but not on the people that follow them, right? Because the leadership has sold out. The followers have been hoodwinked. And so when you point to the incongruity of a statement like Mamdani's statement, and God forbid that he turn out to be the new AOC. Like I'm really rooting for the brother, like with in all sincerity. And like you couldn't get me to say that, but the point is, thank you for that, for the laugh emojis. But I mean, it's like the struggle is real. The pointing out the incongruity in justifying genocide, but saying that you oppose white supremacy, right? Um, point Highlighting the incongruities in terms of the values that they hold dear will often get people to have a kind of break where they see the system from outside the system. And I'm just gonna to posit that probably maybe a third of the people in this room, maybe half of the people in this room that moment where they were fully able to step outside of the claims of liberalism and see them from the outside, that didn't happen for a lot of y'all until Gaza. When you realized, like, wait a minute, the good guys are never the ones incinerating children. There's something, and when people come to that realization that if this is a system that can produce, you know, the massacre and starvation of children and still represent itself as the good choice, then something in the way that you're being taught is massively fraudulent, right? There's something at the bottom of that cannot withstand any scrutiny. And once, believe it or not, once they start scratching that, they'll be out soon. Like they will literally be out soon because it's not hard. It's just that you have to get them to confront it in the terms of the values that they already espouse. Um, and last thing I'll say on this, and I know I've already been too long-winded, but it's easier actually to do this with original recipe MAGA than it is with blue MAGA. It's actually much easier to do. And it's one of the reasons why. So, I mean, to go back to something that I meant to say earlier, 53% of American Muslims voted for the Steinway ticket in 2024, despite Shayla's very pertinent comments about the inherently problematic nature of, you know, politics in the Muslim community. A bunch of otherwise conservative Muslims got that part and just checked out. And when you can appeal, and it was because we were able to appeal to just some, you know, some basic, you know, pieces. Like nobody wants all of their tax dollars being used to incinerate children in other countries. And if you tell them I can cut your taxes by just stopping using your money to kill babies, people like that message. So we were able to get a lot of conservatives to vote for us because of that, and we'll get more in the state of California in the gubernatorial election. You know, on an argument of state by divestment from genocide, stop being run by Israel. Um, I've got two more, and thanks for the question. So I'm just reading the chat. Cartoon to dismantle. Okay, excellent. Yeah, go ahead and correct me on the pronunciation. Is it Ajla or?
Hi, it's Isla.
Isla? That makes more sense.
Salam alaikum. Hello, everyone.
Hey.
I help run the California Greens.
Oh, okay. Welcome in, welcome in. Oh,
Now
yeah,
we're seeing each other.
you're CA Greens. Excellent, excellent.
Also, I have that sweater. Love that sweater.
The sweater goes hard, yeah.
Just briefly, I wanted to kind of go back to the education thing that we were talking about earlier, which I think is like really important right now. I don't know if you guys saw, but trying to connect all the dots. They're in the big, horrendous bill that they just passed. There is the provision that stipulates that all AI regulations shall be illegal by all states for the next 10 years, meaning that no state or legal body in our country will be able to regulate this incredibly, incredibly dangerous technology, which, if we were living in an eco-socialist society, would not be the case. It would be an immensely valuable technology that could be used in so many different ways for mutual benefit, right? But this is one of these like really immense issues that is happening right now. 1 second, my dog's going to start barking. Go ahead.
We'll be okay.
Sorry, my fiance just came home, so he's gonna freak out. So the reason I'm talking about this and try to connect it a bit to everything that's happening right now in immigration, especially Islamophobia, et cetera, everything, Palestine, Congo, Sudan. If you look at the history of immigration in the United States, right, the way that that's developed, what is happening right now with the ICE raids personally, I believe is a very specific demographic shift that they're trying to instill, because they're trying to go back to the very specific demographic ratios that were there to begin with, right?
As anybody else losing?
Those
I lost Isla.
demographic
I hold,
ratios
hold on.
will create compliance.
Hmm.
Sorry.
We just lost you for a moment. So if you could just go back to where you said they're trying to create very specific demographic ratios, that would be helpful. Oh man.
Right. So, because if you look at the history of immigration, specifically in the United States, sorry, let me try to. Is this better?
Let's give it a shot.
Is this better?
Maybe cut the
Okay.
video, perhaps. Cut the video just for a little bit.
Okay. Okay. Let me cut the video. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Fantastic. So the very specific demographic ratios will eventually create consent for whatever reality it is that they're trying to construct. And I think this is really important, where reality that is happening with the censorships, with the kind of constant commercialization of everything, right? With this is something that I believe is extraordinarily urgent and something that needs to be fought both in our within our organization, right, within our community, but within the educational system, most importantly, because the whole idea of a propaganda is to obfuscate something or recreate or make a new truth, make a new reality. So I was hoping that maybe tomorrow we can talk about this a little bit, and talk about this kind of demographic shift that they're trying to implement with the ICE raids, with the, I mean, Trump has been doing this forever, right? From the first election with the whatchamacallits, when he barred people coming in from different
From
countries,
there,
et
yeah.
cetera, et cetera.
From there, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
it's
So that's
it's very helpful. It's an excellent set of questions. So I'll go back in reverse order. The demographic, it's essentially an ethnic cleansing is what's being undertaken. Let's not have any illusions about that is the desired aim. That's what I meant when I said it's a continuation of an earlier genocidal project against indigenous populations. The scope of this and the reason why California is the epicenter of it is that in this campaign research, we're thinking about like, well, what's the biggest minority voting bloc in the state of California? Well, the biggest minority voting bloc in the state of California is whites, because Latinos are the largest ethnic group in the state of California, 40% of the electorate, 34% white, 12% Asian, 6% African American. So they're trying to recreate a demographic majority for the white population inside the state of California. That's what the exercise is designed to do. And that's why the theatrics of power of it are not just about actually pulling people out, but creating a reign of terror where people will be tempted to self-deport. It's an effort to engineer a particular kind of outcome because let's just be clear about this. Continuous National Guard, Marine presence, and other repressive mechanisms to control political uprisings is not a sustainable option for this government. It's not a sustainable option. It cannot be implemented over an extended period of time effectively. It will produce more vehement resistance and more organized resistance, it will produce a cataclysmic outcome. So what it is doing instead is it's a shock and awe campaign that is designed to try to, as quickly as possible, create the kind of demographic shift that you're talking about. It's an ethnically cleanse the population. With respect to the role of AI, it's a broader conversation that is absolutely part of where we are headed tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be about lessons on things not to repeat and how to respond to the unique circumstances of this particular moment. And the way that the surveillance state and the tech industry has been merging into the corporate governing class so that we have this, wall being broken between Palantir and the Defense Department, so that we have the same artificial intelligence companies and the military technology companies now merging, and then you've got the social media people owning the same things, and now you've got Spotify, for God's sakes, investing in military technology. All of this is the creation of a very specific kind of new surveillance state, which presents, yes, massive challenges, also actually incredible opportunities for effective resistance. And even in a very, very highly disorganized fashion, the mobilizations that we're seeing in California are showing exactly how weak this is. And that's the last thing that I want to say on that particular point, is that all of these efforts at repression are signs of weakness, not of strength. Strong, functioning mythos and ideology of consent in oppression um, does not require this kind of scale of repressive activity. This happens in the fall of every single empire. It's that moment in The Wizard of Oz where they realize that it's just a little sorry white dude pulling strings behind behind the curtain. He said, "Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. I am the great and powerful Oz." Nah, nigga, you just some dude in the back, pulling lever. Sorry, I'm not supposed to curse in these events, but you're just some guy in the back, pulling a bunch of levers to launch big smoke screens because you are in an incredibly weak and fragile position. And the United States empire, while it has greater capacity for surveillance and death dealing than it has ever had, has also never been more fragile and has never been closer in a temporal sense to its inevitable demise than it is today. It is teetering on a ledge, and all we got to do is just and let gravity do the rest. So there are all kinds of ways that if we heal and if we build together and if we organize together and if we don't try to erase our differences but try to like transcend them and come together and build common cause, we are absolutely and entirely capable of overcoming the forms of repression that are coming towards us. We're absolutely capable of it. Do not believe for a second that defeat is inevitable. In fact, the fall of empire is that which is inevitable. The biggest question is what are we going to be building? And we absolutely can be using this. Is one thing I've always disagreed with Audre Lorde on, and God forgive me for disagreeing with Audre Lorde, but I do absolutely believe that the master's tools can be used to dismantle the master's house. Any tool will do to tear something down. Where I think that I agree with the spirit of the intervention is that master's tools cannot be used to build a new house. We're going to need to have tools that come from outside of a white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist framework to build structures that are actually sustainable, that actually reproduce sustainability in our moral and social and ecological and ethical environments. But with respect to tearing things down, we absolutely can use these apps. With respect to tearing things down, we absolutely can use these institutions. In fact, electoral institutions in our current configuration of power is one of the pieces of the system that is least easily controlled by capital. Corporations have locked down our media, they've locked down our social media, they've locked down a bunch of avenues. But actually, electoral politics is one of these areas where the vestigial remnants of previous systems are actually still accessible. And that's why the ethnic cleansing is so necessary, is because they have perceived that electoral avenues are one of the principal structural weaknesses when corporate capitalism has taken over all of these other domains. People still have this pesky thing called elections. And as Malcolm said in 64, we can vote those bums out at any time. And that's what they're afraid of. Lissette.
Hi, Dr. Ware. Thank you for your time. I have to just tell you, I'm a big fan. I've been following you. I comment here and there on your Instagram, like I know I'm taking time, but I have to say thank you. Thank you for making these
It's very
lessons.
kind. I get so many hateful comments that I'm never going to turn down
No, and I'm also a
a comment.
Latina with my grandfather was Afro Latino. I have indigenous. So you talk on a lot of things that I was born in California. I'm not in California now. Anyways, I'm digressing. So I going back to the points that you made when you were talking about points 3 and 4 and how white leftists needed to listen to identity and how they, whether they were under capitalist systems or not, how they perpetrated systems of oppressions, especially under the guise and tools of racism.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm a leftist myself, and I have a background in architecture, and I studied a lot of land development and city development, and looking at European governments or systems that were not capitalism.
COINTELPRO has entered the chat. Somebody put it in.
Identified.
Hold
They
on.
still structured themselves.
Listen, we lost you for a moment because the NS
Oh, no.
the NSA is trying to keep the questions and answers from happening. So just go back just about 30 seconds. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So again, having studied architecture and land development, going back to European systems, which we study a lot, leftists, right, socialists, communists, whatever you want to call them, non-capitalist systems and how they develop land and property, all under the guise of racism, even within white-on-white racism, right, the Irish and the Brits.
Yep.
And so knowing that you have a lot of history and scholarship with like Islamic studies, one of the things that I tell my liberal friends, especially within the architecture industry, I tell them, like, look at how land is development. A lot of you guys are part of the NIMBY community, right? You want all these initiatives, but not in your backyard. So this is where I start to sort of break their own ideologies down against them. But I would like to go and see it, and not for, I'm agnostic, but seeing as how you have a lot of studies in the Islamic area of that part of the world, I find that to be more of a real social model where disparities weren't drawn between religious beliefs or even ethnicities to some extent. And if you have anything that you can share within your studies that have covered land development or social development and architecture, you don't have to give me the resources now. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but anything that you can provide, because within the history of architecture, and I do have a degree in it as well, it is limited. We have to span a lot of parts of the globe and different eras and generations and timelines. And even though I did school for 8 years, it's still limited. And so anything you can share, I would appreciate.
I can give you the what I think is actually the best example of this, and it's the example that's at the center of my consciousness every time that I'm thinking about how we construct autonomous, sustainable communities for the long term. So, if you read the second chapter of my first academic book, The Walking Quran, it is about how African Muslim clerical communities that were involved in resisting the rise of the Atlantic slave trade and oncoming European imperialism had a very particular way that they structured physical space and agricultural communities in order to guarantee self-sustaining agriculture and be able to reproduce society in spite of these impingements. So the second chapter of my first book provides the historical background for that. The most successful contemporary example of it is the city of Touba in Senegal, which was founded by Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, late 19th, early 20th century spiritual leader that is now 5.5 million people. It has its own jurisprudence system. It's a state within a state.
Yeah.
And because it operates according to a spatial logic of Muslim community that goes back 1,000 years before European empire in the space, and it reproduces it under contemporary circumstances. So it's a thriving center of commerce. It's a thriving center of spirituality. It's listen, when all hell breaks loose here, look for me in Tuba. That's where I'm gonna be. Until then, we're fighting to try to save this place. But when it's clear that it's crashing, that's where I'm going because it's designed to be able to reproduce a particular kind of long-term sustainability, even under the most adverse circumstances. And it's been enacting a kind of spatial and cultural and even architectural logic that emerges from indigenous West African traditions and Islamic traditions that merged organically into a single whole. And my whole argument has always been that, especially as African descended people, especially as Muslims, but not exclusively as African descended people or as Muslims, we should be students of those systems that have been able to provide countervailing models for how you produce thriving, sustainable, ecologically sound communities. That's what I mean when I say that we have to get over this divide between revolutionary culture and cultural revolution and actually study what our colonial, pre-imperial, pre-white supremacist traditions have to teach us about how to produce and order society and polity in ways that are more sustainable. And that I think is the biggest difference in my approach from, frankly, anything that I've seen anyone do in the Black radical tradition historically. The closest to it is Kwame Ture, because Kwame Ture started to understand when he says, and I'll talk about this tomorrow, but he says, when Marx and Engels said religion is an opiate for the masses, that was only true for Europe. He said, if you study the history of non-Western societies, they're always able to evolve spiritual traditions that are able to fight against these systems. And he was speaking at the University of Hawaii when he gave this lecture. He said, if the people of Hawaii were ever to try to fully get themselves free from American imperialist oppression without reference to their sacred traditions, they would end up running themselves in circles. That in the end, we have to be rooted, not just in an astute reading of Marx and what Marx had to say about capital. Don't get me wrong, like I'm down for that reading of capital, but the humanity and resistance to colonialism and imperialism and dehumanization doesn't start with Marx. And we have in our traditions literally millennia of effective forms of alternative organization that can be operationalized. So I reference you to a book, and the last thing I'll say, and I'll close things with this. Go to the first interview that I did with Colonial Outcasts with Greg.
I saw you.
Markwayne. The very first one, before I got called onto the campaign. Yeah. And yeah, so that's okay. One of the principal things that I'm talking about there is how we tap into those longer term traditions. And in the end, you know, the goals that we're trying to produce as a political movement are about creating the space wherein actually sustainable, nourishing, humanizing models of existence can be brought into a kind of heterogeneous existence with one another. All of that is possible under capitalism, white supremacy, or imperialism. So more on that tomorrow. 2.5 hours. Which if you've been here before, you know that that's not as bad as it could have gotten. We're going to start with a discussion of Chairman Fred Hampton. Everybody, if you don't do the reading, at least make sure that you watch the movie. Lord willing, the creek don't rise. Well, we'll see you back here tomorrow. Take care.